Hi, I'm Martha Stewart, and we're back with a new season of my podcast. This season will be even more revealing and more personal, with more entrepreneurs, more live events, and more questions from you. I'm talking to my cosmetic dermatologist, Dr. Dan Belkin, about the secrets behind my skincare. Encore Jane about creating a billion-dollar startup. Walter Isaacson about the geniuses who changed the world. Listen and subscribe to the Martha Stewart podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Truck stop brothels run by a web of ex-cons. A Commonwealth attorney wasted on whiskey and power. Protection exchanged for cash and flesh. This is Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South. And I am your host and lifelong wayward woman, Dr. Lindsay Byron. Listen to Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Across Generations, where the voices of Black women unite. I'm your host, Tiffany Cross. Join me and be a part of sisterhood, friendship, wisdom, and laughter. We gather a seasoned elder, myself as the middle generation, and a vibrant young soul for engaging intergenerational conversations. Prepare to engage or hear perspectives that literally no one else has had. Listen to Across Generations podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi everyone, it's Amanda Rieger Green. Welcome to Soul Sessions. Today, I am having a conversation with my friend, Fallon. If you don't know Allie, you should know her. We just did a podcast together, her podcast, which is called Write Your Story. She and I are on the same podcast network together. She is an author, a speaker, a writing coach. She's also my friend, but I look at Allie like kind of a wise life coach. And I think it's an archetype that, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Allie, but I feel like so much of what you do professionally and personally with writing, supporting space for people to write, is helping them tune in to their voice, to trust it, to use it, and to evolve it. Welcome, Allie.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's so interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like I've been in this evolution in my career, and I'll talk a little bit about how I got here, but I feel like I've been on the cusp of this evolution of realizing that I'm not just a publishing coach, but that I'm stepping into this more of a life coach, although it's been hard for me for whatever reason to own that part of myself, but it's cool to hear you speak to that, because I've had other close and trusted people in my life saying the same thing recently. So the way I got here is my career has been in publishing. I published my first book in 2013. After I published that book, I realized it was going to be really hard to generate a living wage selling a $20 product without selling hundreds of thousands of them. And so as a way to bridge the gap in my income, I decided to start working with other people who also wanted to write books and coaching them on how to build out the outline for their books so that they would have a really robust guidebook kind of for when they sat down to write the manuscript. So I spent many, many years doing that with various authors, mostly nonfiction authors, although I have worked with a few fiction authors, but a lot of self-help books, business books, leadership books, marriage books, books of pastors, Olympians, just anybody who's a public figure, is an influencer on Instagram or something, and has a story that they want to share. I've spent most of my career sitting with those people and helping them take their stories and their ideas and then turn it into a book outline. And one of the things that I watched happen over and over again is that people would have this really powerful transformative experience with the act of sharing their story. So they would share a story about their marriage and take it from their brain and put it onto paper. And then they would have these epiphanies and insights in the process of doing that would more deeply connect them to themselves. It would get them unstuck in these, circumstances they were in inside of their relationships. Their relationship during this process would blossom and transform and become even more intimate and rewarding. And I was just watching this happen over and over again. Someone would be writing a book about business and their business would start to do better. They'd be writing a book about relationships and their relationships would improve. And I was like, what's happening here? So I started to do some digging and found this whole body of data that talks about the power of putting pen to paper. There's, decades of research that have been done that show that the act of putting pen to paper for as little as 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row can measurably improve your mood. It can measurably improve your immune system. It can improve your relationships. It can improve your finances. Like there's not a part of your life that the act of writing can't touch. So I was like having this experience with my clients, uncovered this body of data and was like really geeking out over it. Like I was just like, this is amazing. This demonstrates exactly what I've been witnessing happen to my clients over the course of the last decade. And as that was all happening, I also went through this really dark time in my personal life. I went through a divorce. I left the church that I had grown up in, felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me in every area of my life. And at the time, I was contracted to write a book that was called Our First Years. It was supposed to be about my marriage, about how difficult the first few years of marriage can be. And meanwhile, my marriage is falling apart. So I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be writing that book. So I sort of substituted the writing of that book for sitting down to write about what was happening in my life. I just started writing the details of what was taking place. It was like more instinctual than anything. I didn't think I was going to publish it. I just knew that I needed to tell the story. And then I started having the same experience that I'd watched my clients have, where I was like piecing back together my own sense of identity, my own sense of voice, my own sense of like the meaning and purpose in all of this. I was constructing a meaning out of the story as I was writing about it. And I literally put my life back together through the act of writing about what was taking place. And so those three things, like watching my clients have this experience and then reading the data and then having my own personal experience with the act of writing my story, all together set me up for this work that I'm doing now. This book I have that's called Write Your Story, and I've been teaching workshops called Write Your Story for the last few years. And my podcast is called Write Your Story. This is my transition from a publishing coach into like, I don't know, life coach, whatever you want to call it. But like what I'm teaching people is really not about writing, although the act of writing is very powerful. But the act of writing, it's a bridge to a deeper connection with yourself, to more clarity in your life, to a better understanding of what you're here for, to a deeper sense of listening to what your life is trying to show you and tell you. And when you can help people get access to that, they feel better about themselves, they're more confident, they have more clarity, they take more action, and they just generally feel more at home in their own skin.
First of all, I told y'all you would want to know Allie. Her story is amazing. Her gifts are practical and useful. And we'll talk a little bit about when we write, how we channel ourselves. We get to tap into our truest selves. We get to pull back the proverbial onion layers, of course. She's mentioned that to you. But what I really appreciate about your wisdom and your experience is the parallel story of your personal experience and this dark night of the soul, a difficult time, a shift, a breakup on multiple levels of your life. And going through this simultaneously, doing it with clients, and then it's like the universe. We sometimes think when things are totally falling apart, they're actually falling together. And I think that's a main theme of what I want everyone to take away today, because this conversation to me, and Allie and I were talking about this before we started recording, it's so divinely timed because Mercury is in retrograde. And if you listen to last week's podcast, and I shared about Mercury retrograde being this time to revise, rewrite, to edit. And it's about editing yourself, your story, and it's retrograde in Aries, which is the I am. So I love how the universe orchestrated this. Allie and I didn't plan it this way. We were laughing about how this is planned. But back to when we think things are falling apart and they're painful and they're tough and confusing and uncertain, and we fall into different versions of ourselves, victim roles, frustration, fear, anger, all parts of us come out that are not really pretty, whatever that may be. And I know everyone out there resonates, whether it's death or a divorce or a career change, a health challenge. You can look at this from so many angles, but I do appreciate all the parallels and where you are in your journey of how you saw this happening for your clients by them getting their stories on paper, getting it out of their heads and onto the page, and it actually creating healing and transformation and growth, clarity too, but you walking through the same journey and how it has evolved who you are, where you are as a person. And I do want to say this on a personal level. Allie today is in this really healthy marriage and relationship and has a strong partnership. So even speaking to detrimental things going on in a relationship and a divorce, and obviously you were doing the work and writing and seeing it in yourself, and you've written this story to do relationship better, to do it healthier, do it differently, but do it more aligned with yourself. And also you were talking about leaving the church that you were affiliated with.
Yeah.
That is a huge shift in family infrastructure, values, systems of belief. So it wasn't just the tangible relationship piece of things falling apart and needing to be healed and mended within yourself. To me, there was also this massive shift in your meaning, your purpose, and how that looks in your daily life.
Totally. I mean, one of the things when I talk about the story of the divorce, it helps for people to understand that this person who I was married to, I was also in business with. That was how we made our living, was we were in business together. We also planted a church together inside of the church community that I grew up in. He also was acting as my agent to the publishers. The other piece is there had been some tension and animosity with my family of origin when I married him. The family was kind of split. Like some people really loved him and some people were like, they weren't totally sure about him. And so then when I announced that we were getting divorced, it was like split in reverse. Like some people were like, we saw this coming finally. And then other people were like, hold on, wait, before you get divorced, like, have you guys really tried everything? And so the marriage ending wasn't just about the marriage ending. It's exactly like you're talking about. It was like the breaking apart of every part of my life. I remember thinking to myself, I'll never write another book again. Like no one will ever publish me, because the first book that I wrote that did well in the marketplace, that would be my leveraging point to go to a publisher and say, look, I published a book and it did well, but now my last name is different. So there will be no name recognition. And I mean, now I can look back and think like it's such a small detail that that's not going to prevent, my career from moving forward. But at the time, that's how it really felt. It really felt like every aspect of my life was completely breaking apart.
When you say that, it's funny, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think about your inner self and your outer self, like the reputation, who people see. And our personality to me is at first glance, how people read us or perceive us at first glance. But then we have our reputation, how people see us from afar. And then there's this inside version of ourselves. So when I call it a dark night of the soul for you and moving through that, it was every aspect of your being, your family of origin, business, your belief system internally, your sense of self and who I am and what I do in the world and how is this impacted. So I think that paints the picture for everyone. And I know people resonate, you all resonate out there. We've had times, or maybe you're going through something now where you feel like it is this revolutionary identity shift and how that has been navigated. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit in writing your story and, your podcast and the book that you have coming out, which is on pre-sale, by the way. It's called Write Your Story by Allie Fallon. The official launch date is May 7th, but it's on pre-sale now. So you can definitely, I assume, get it on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about like all of this, like your internal self and all these external versions of yourself that you had worked diligently to create and live in life, all of that being just torn apart or broken down.
Before you use AI to transform your agency, you need to begin with trust. Introducing Watson X Governance, helping you govern any AI as data, models, and policies change so you can scale it responsibly. Let's create AI that begins with trust with Watson X Governance. Learn more at ibm.com/federal. IBM. Let's create.
Truck stop brothels run by a web of ex-cons. A Commonwealth attorney wasted on whiskey and power. protection exchanged for cash and flesh. This is Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South, and I am your host, Dr. Lindsay Byron. Join me as I bring to life a wild menagerie of country boys, kingpins, and working girls living the high life, until it all came crashing down. Listen to Hookergate on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want early access to new episodes and exclusive bonus content, completely ad-free, be sure to subscribe to iHeart True Crime Plus, available exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Martha Stewart, and we're back with a new season of my podcast. This season will be even more revealing and more personal, with more entrepreneurs, more trailblazers, more live events, more Martha, and more questions from you. I'm talking to my cosmetic dermatologist, Dr. Dan Belkin, about the secrets behind my skincare. Walter Isaacson about the geniuses who changed the world. Encore Jane about creating a billion-dollar startup. Dr. Eliza Pressman about the 5 basic strategies to help parents raise good humans. Florence Fabricant about the authenticity in the world of food writing. Be sure to tune in to Season 2 of the Martha Stewart Podcast. Listen and subscribe to the Martha Stewart Podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk about like all of this, like your internal self and all these external versions of yourself that you had worked diligently to create and live in life, all of that being just torn apart or broken down.
So what would happen is I would wake up every morning, I would go to the coffee shop that was in my neighborhood, and I would sit for 2 hours and just write about what was taking place in my life. I always talk about writing like looking in a mirror. So when you put the words on the page, you're able to see something more clearly. It would be the difference between looking in a mirror or having someone else describe you to yourself. So like that's sort of what you're talking about, where it's like I had my reputation on lockdown. In fact, I eventually published the book, which is called Indestructible. It's the story of my divorce and then finding myself outside of that marriage. But I tell a story in the book about my friend Sarah, who was a yoga instructor, who was a really huge guide to me in the story. And she says something really funny to me about how when she first met me, I was like a Christmas ornament. You know, she's just like, you like had your nails perfectly done. You presented yourself in this like very proper kind of a way. Like she's like, I could have hung you on my Christmas tree. Like you were just so perfect. And then while we're having this conversation, I'm sitting on the floor of the yoga studio, just drenched in sweat. And that was a bit of the transformation from the beginning to the end, was like the difference between the person that we present to the world that we hope looks good and the person who is like looking back at us in the mirror. So this idea of writing the words on the page and being able to see yourself clearly in the mirror. And sometimes the things that you see are not things you like very much. Sometimes that first time that you look at yourself in the mirror, you go like, oh, I didn't realize that I had mud smeared across my face or whatever it is. And so the writing experience gives us this opportunity to make adjustments, make changes, to see things in a different kind of a way, to see them from a different vantage point. And that was what I did as I wrote the stories. The first draft of the story was really chaotic. It didn't have any kind of structure. The other thing that happened in the first draft is I started to notice patterns in myself. Like one pattern I really noticed is that I was very, very bitter and resentful toward this person, my ex-husband. I would read the writing back to myself and I would be like, wow, this girl doesn't sound like very much fun to be around. Like the narrator that was coming through was like, there was a lot of bitterness and a lot of resentment. And I don't fault myself for that. I have a lot of compassion because I had been through hell and back with him. And so the anger makes sense and the bitterness makes sense. But I just got to the point where as I was reading, I was like, I don't want to be this narrator. Like I want to narrate the story differently. And that's the opportunity that writing gives us, is when we see something on the page that we realize we don't like, that makes us not a very sympathetic hero to the story, we get an opportunity to make an upgrade, to see the story in a different kind of way. I always tell writers, there's 1,000 different ways you could tell this story. So just make sure that you're aware that there's 1,000 different ways and that you get to pick which way you want to tell it. Even if all of the details are the same, there's still infinite ways that you could put those details together to frame them for your reader and for yourself. And that's the agency that we take when we take the time to sit down to write our story, is the agency of saying, how do I want to tell this story? What details do I want to stand out to a reader? How do I want to come across as the narrator? What's the energy of the person that I want to be in my life? And those are really empowering questions to ask yourself and really empowering decisions to get to make.
I'm having all these mind blown moments over here because you're articulating things in experiences I've had and giving life to and meaning to, or to what I've experienced. And what I liked about what you were sharing just now is, as the reader, not seeing being sympathetic to the hero and seeing those patterns come out, and you're like, gosh, all this bitterness that keeps coming out. And for me, the way that I think, that I know that I've done that in my life, I do quite a bit of journaling and write intentions, and I'm pretty routine in that because I love it. It flushes out what's going on internally, so I can look at all the moving parts and what's consistent or inconsistent. And sometimes I don't like the consistencies, if it's shame or self-pity or judgment, whatever, these repeating patterns that come out. But I've experienced that, and in recovery and in 12-step work, where we have to get out on paper all of our resentments, all of those old feelings, and we have to disclose that to another trusted human being who can help us look at our part, look at our role, look at who we are in the story as the central character. And the big revelation in that, apart from forgiveness and healing, and of course there's making amends, if anybody out there is in 12-step work or familiar with that, but also it's this opportunity to say, where can I take action? What is my side of the street, and how do I begin to own it and clean it up? And then once those things begin to happen and you're aware of all those faulty, gray, dark areas and the beautiful areas too, it's this ownership and what you and I were talking about before we started recording, becoming the main character of your own life.
Yes. I love that you talked about taking action, because this is one of the really big epiphanies that came from writing my own story, was realizing that what I learned in school and in my training for writers about narrative structure is that stories are built around one central character, and that character is the character who we follow from the start of the story to the end. And human brains have an expectation for a few things about that character in a story. If these elements are not in a story, we disengage. We just don't have any interest. We won't go watch the movie. We'll leave the theater early. We'll put the book down. We don't finish the book. The expectations that we have for that main character of the story is they need to transform from the beginning of the story to the end, so they have to change. The other expectation that we have is that the only way the plot moves forward is when the hero takes action. So we intuitively understand that the plot of a story cannot move forward when the main character sits on the couch. If the main character sits on the couch and wants to meet the love of their life, but doesn't ever leave the front door, they're never going to meet the love of their life. It wouldn't even be an interesting movie to us if it was a romantic comedy where she sits on the couch waiting for her knight in shining armor and he shows up at the front. We'd be like, boring. It's not an interesting story. And so understanding those things about how narrative structure worked helped me to start to put some structure around the chaotic stories that I was telling myself. And as I put that structure in place, I realized I don't have to compromise the integrity of the details of the story. In other words, I'm still telling a true story. I'm just giving it a structure that wasn't there before. And one of the main things that I did was I put myself in the position of the hero. So when I put myself in the position of the hero of the story, it stopped me from feeling resentful, because I stopped asking questions like, how could he do this to me? How could anyone act like this towards someone else? I stopped worrying so much about him. I started asking the story, if I'm the hero in this story and my action is what moves the story forward, and it's my transformation that this story is about, how am I transforming as a person? How is this making me better? Who do I want to be on the other side of this? I also asked the question, what makes a woman marry a man that she doesn't want to marry? Why did I make that choice? I knew on my wedding day, I remember feeling like, I don't want to do this. And I was like, well, it's too late. People are all here. What else am I going to do? And walk down the aisle. So I had to really dig deep inside of the story to get to the root of what motivates the hero, what happened in her backstory that made her act in this way, to find a position of deep compassion for her and also a resolution, like a resolve to get to the resolve. It was like, there has to be a conclusion to this story. And the conclusion of a personal story comes in the transformation of the hero. So who am I trying to become? Because this story won't end until I become her. And moving into that position, it was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm the author of my story. Literally, I'm the author. I used to tell people all the time years ago, before any of this happened, I would say like, personal stories don't work the way the movies do because we don't get to write our own endings. And I don't agree with that anymore. I think the ending to your story comes when you decide how you would like the story to end. You do not always get control over other people or over what happens in the world or what other people decide to do, but you always have 100% agency over what you choose to do, the meaning you choose to make of the story, the kind of transformation that you want to actualize inside your story. Nobody else can take that away from you. And I titled the book, my memoir about the divorce. It's called Indestructible, which is a terrible title for a book because nobody knows how to spell that word. But the idea of indestructible was like, when everything else is stripped away, the part of me that no one can take from me, that no one can destroy, is the part of me that gets to choose who I am, what makes me matter, what makes me valuable, what am I here for, what am I doing, what am I about? Nobody can take that from me. I don't care how much money you take from me. I don't care if you betray me, defile me, blame me, abuse me, hurt me, kick me out. Like, nobody can take that from me.
First of all, I hope everyone out there realizes, like, Allie threw out about 20 journal prompts. And Allie is the queen of journal prompts because this is what she does. She helps people write their story. She is a publishing and a writing coach, but you can tell when I called her a life coach, she is pulling out purpose and meaning, and she does it in a very methodical yet intuitive way, and also through her own experience. But definitely go back, and I'm going to do this after we quit recording because I'm going to journal, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back and start asking these questions to myself about who do I want to be? And what that makes me think of, a couple of things. One, it really resonates with the numerology of this year. We are in an 8 universal year, and the 8 is about empowerment. So usually what the 8 creates is the polar opposite of that. So a lot of people are going through phases of massive disempowerment, disillusion, forgetting their agency and their sovereignty. And everything you were saying to me really resonated with a theme of 2024, us being in this eclipse season, this massive Aries eclipse coming in, which is all about the I. What do I do? How do I take action? How do I perceive? How do I move forward? How do I want to move forward? What is that story I'm writing? But it also taps into co-creating your own life, manifestation, the law of attraction. And this is why Allie and I want to share with you, because we recognize the spirituality and the spiritual practice that comes with writing. And it also helps with manifestation, because Allie has already told you she saw the transformation in many clients' lives, whether it was around business or personal relationships, when they began to author their own story and take the agency and decide what kind of hero they wanted to be. And they started to actually manifest and write that into their lives. And she experienced that as well. And I have experienced that in my life too. So I hope you all recognize this podcast and what Allie has gifted us are some great journal prompts through Mercury retrograde and eclipse season. This could not be a better time to revise your story. So take these next few weeks to spend time writing. And Allie, you've got to tell us, because my big question and where I get stumped up with writing is my consistency. Here's where I'm consistent. I'm really good with new and full moons. And I have been for years. I'm really great. I always journal on new and full moons, and I do at the beginning of the month and usually the end of the month because of the energetic shift, because that is the routine I've created. So we know I'm journaling typically about 4 times a month. I journal more than that and I journal often, but I still can get inconsistent. And I feel like a lot of us we set ourselves up to fail. Like I set unreasonable expectations with my writing or my journaling, whatever to sit down and have that time. And then I don't meet them and I shame myself and then I blow it off. And I'm sure you've heard this. What do we do with that? Like, what do you share with people to help overcome what feels like a mountain to me sometimes?
So this will be really, really helpful for you and for your brain. The data shows that in order to see a measurable improvement in your life, you need to journal for 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row every 6 months. The pressure that we put on ourselves for all of the things, including writing, is just so bizarre to me that we get in this negative cycle. It's like going to the gym or whatever, where we're like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week for an hour every time, and I'm going to lift weights. And you set the bar so high for yourself that you don't get to get into the cycle of like feel good emotions. You know what I mean? What I teach people to do with their writing is to create a relationship to your writing where you want to do it because it makes you feel good. Because that's what writing will do, is it will make you feel good. We all have experiences with writing. We also have some experiences with writing, many of us do, that are traumatic. And so when I teach writing workshops, I'll have people tell me the earliest memory that they have as it relates to writing, because it's very telling. You'll get half of the room that will say, I had a 4th grade teacher who just really believed in me and she, praised my writing and told me I was a great writer. And then you'll have people who say, my mom found my journal and she got it out and she read it to my friends. But if you can create a positive relationship with writing where you actually look forward to sitting down to the page to do some journaling, you actually you remember the dopamine hit that you get, then you're going to be as addicted to journaling as you are to Instagram because it's just its own self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I love this. I feel good when I do it. But instead, what a lot of us do, are we're like, I'm going to write every day for an hour, every morning. And of course, you're not going to do that. Life is going to get in the way, and there'll be days where you'll miss your writing practice. And people go like, oh, see, I always do this. I have no discipline. And it's like, no, that's not true. You have no discipline. It's like life is busy and it's crazy and carving out this time is challenging. But 2 minutes is better than no minutes. 5 minutes is better than 2 minutes, Don't set the bar so high. It doesn't need to be an hour. 20 minutes, that was like what the sample set that they used when they did these research studies. So 20 minutes at a time for 4 days in a row. But even 5 minutes is a great amount of time.
Yesterday, I was listening to a podcast on addiction to dopamine and how we've really dysregulated ourselves because of all the dopamine seeking behaviors out there, whether it's from alcoholism, addiction, or sex and relationships, codependency, to all of the screen time we have. I mean, we can go on. And then our dopamine receptors get shot and they can't re-regulate. And then we're not producing dopamine and we have to get it externally. I mean, it's a cycle and it's also an epidemic. I mean, this woman was an expert talking about it being an epidemic. But what light bulb went off is when I write, when I do my journaling, I jump in and I get into it and I'm like, yes. And I can just keep going and it floods. And the channeling that happens, which I want to communicate to everyone, when I start writing, sometimes I'm writing so fast that it is flying out of my soul. And I look at it and I marvel. Sometimes it's beautiful and incredible. And sometimes it's ugly. And I didn't even know those words and that nastiness was in there. So it's not so much about what comes out. It's almost like the force in which it comes through that just feels true. Whether I get to look at it, this truth comes out, but there is also this adrenaline or dopamine. And I never put 2 and 2 together with the dopamine and the writing, but I feel good and I look forward to it. I look forward to the ritual of it. But knowing that it is also a healthy replacement for those other forms of dopamine that we are all seeking, the television, food, whatever it may be, knowing, okay, Amanda, maybe you don't need to watch another Netflix show. Maybe you go write for 5 minutes. Because if I decide to write for 5 minutes, it's 25 minutes. And I just feel enriched and illuminated most of the time.
Yeah. And think of the positive cycle you create when you do that, when you set the bar really low. You're like, I'm just going to write for 2 minutes. And then you wrote for 25. And then you're like, I'm a rock star. Like every time I do this, I go above and beyond, I was telling someone yesterday, a client who I've been working with, who was telling me he has no discipline, which everyone says. And I'm like, that's just simply not true. I'm like, you built a multi-million-dollar business. There's no possible way you have no discipline. Everyone's discipline just comes out a little differently. And I was telling him about this running coach back in my 20s. I ran a marathon. His name is Jeff, and I can't remember his last name, but he wrote a book on how to train for a marathon. One of the things that he taught me that I will never forget is that there are going to be days when you don't want to go for your training run. And so you just tell yourself, I'm not going to go for my training run today. I'm just going to put on the outfit. So you put on the running clothes that you have, and then you're like, I'm not going to go for my training run. I am going to go stand out on the front porch and just see what's happening in the neighborhood. So you stand out on the front porch, you just kind of peer out at what's going on. And then you tell yourself, I'm not going to go for my run today, but I am going to go walk around the block because it's just such a beautiful day. So then you go walk around the block, and then you tell yourself, I'm not going to go for my training run, but I'm going to just jog a little bit because wouldn't that feel good? And you just kind of trick yourself slowly into like working your way up. And then you're just like, wow, even if you don't complete your 8-mile training run, you ran 4 miles and you were planning on running 0 miles. And so you feel awesome. And I love using that same kind of strategy for writing, where you set the bar really, really low. You just tell yourself, I'm not going to write today. I don't feel up for it, but I'm going to just sit at my computer. We'll see what happens. Or I'm going to get my journal out, whatever. I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee and sit at the table and just sit in silence. And then you say like, I'm just going to write down one word. Like if I had to pick one word that comes to mind, what would the word be? I'm just going to make a bullet point list of things that feel true for me today. That feels nice. Yeah, I'm going to make a bullet point list of things that feel true for me today, and just see like how much momentum you can pick up. Sort of slowly trick yourself into doing the thing that you know you ultimately want to do. As human beings, I just feel like we're fickle creatures, and we can sometimes let our feelings get in the way. And then whenever, for me at least, whenever that negative cycle starts to pick up, where I catch myself saying like, oh, I'm the worst. I always do this. I have no discipline. Like that story that we're telling about ourselves is taking us away from the things that we want to do and towards the things that we actually really don't want to do, like binging, Netflix, which there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I enjoy. I mean, sometimes that is. I set aside the time, and I actually, to me, spirituality comes so practically. I find it in the everyday. I find it in putting on 90s music in the car and rolling the windows down. And when my spirit when I start to dance and move and groove and smile, and then all of a sudden I'm like, yes, I am light. I am love. I mean, I practice spirituality, and I will do it binging Netflix. And I don't mean like guts and gore, although I can watch any crime and, all of the thrillers in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just recently was talking about how I discovered Ted Lasso, and I literally watched Ted Lasso and could feel I could feel the dopamine, of course, but the lightheartedness, the joy, all of the upliftment. And when I would watch it, I would consciously sit there, and when something would be sentimental or just joyful or sad, I would say, ooh, that's what that feels like. And then I would allow it to run through my body. So sometimes, like you said, we can find value and our truth in the most mundane places. But when it comes back to this writing and a practice of writing that does not need to be overwhelming, setting the bar low so we can surprise ourselves, like it's like a snowball rolling downhill, it grows, or a rubber band ball, each time you put a rubber band on, it starts to get bigger and bigger, and it's building that practice. And I want to ask you this.
Truck stop brothels run by a web of ex-cons. A Commonwealth attorney wasted on whiskey and power. Protection exchanged for cash and flesh. This is Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South. And I am your host, Dr. Lindsay Byron. Join me as I bring to life a wild menagerie of country boys, kingpins, and working girls living the high life. Until it all came crashing down. Listen to Hookergate on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want early access to new episodes and exclusive bonus content, completely ad-free, be sure to subscribe to iHeart True Crime Plus, available exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Martha Stewart, and we're back with a new season of my podcast. This season will be even more revealing and more personal, with more entrepreneurs, more trailblazers, more live events, more Martha, and more questions from you. I'm talking to my cosmetic dermatologist, Dr. Dan Belkin, about the secrets behind my skincare. Walter Isaacson about the geniuses who changed the world. Encore Jane about creating a billion-dollar startup. Dr. Eliza Pressman about the 5 basic strategies to help parents raise good humans. Florence Fabricant about the authenticity in the world of food writing. Be sure to tune in to Season 2 of the Martha Stewart Podcast. Listen and subscribe to the Martha Stewart Podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
iHeart Podcast Update. This week on your free iHeartRadio app. Rachel goes rogue. For the first time, she's ready to tell you the real story on her own terms. What's true, what's false, and the secrets she's been waiting to reveal. 2 Jersey Jays. From menopause to making the most of your 40s and 50s, follow these fabulous women as they navigate family, friendships, and even frenemies. The Eds. There's so much more to the Eds than being married to real housewives. These 2 gentlemen are loved and well-mannered, quite the opposite of their trash-talking wives. Hear these podcasts and more on your free iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
I do want to talk about writing and intuition and your spiritual journey, because this is what Allie and I have been talking about personally. We talked about it on her podcast recently, Write Your Story. You can check out that episode that the 2 of us shared. We talk about intuition and intuitive development, but share a little bit about your recent experience in intuitive development and the growth of your enrichment of your spiritual life with writing, but in general.
So I've been through a massive spiritual evolution from the time that I left the church that I grew up in. I think there was a period of time where it felt like, what is my spirituality going to become? Because I've always been a very spiritual person, but outside of the container that I was taught, like prayer, for example. I'm like, doing it in the way that I was taught isn't connecting for me anymore. So then how do I do it? And I kind of floundered around for a while. But in the past couple of years, I've really rediscovered like a really deep, much deeper than it's ever been before, deep and true and authentic spirituality that is really working for me. And that's part of, like, I reached out to you several weeks ago because I've been using oracle cards, and I actually was calling them tarot cards. I didn't even know that I was drawn to the cards, and I saw a friend of mine post a deck on Instagram. And so I just went and bought the deck, and then you recommended the animal oracle. So I went and bought that deck, and I was calling them tarot cards because that's how ignorant I am to this spiritual practice. I had just never used it before. And so I reached out to you and I was like, I don't know why, but these cards have been calling to me. And I want to have a conversation with you about it on the podcast, because I feel like there's a strong connection between spirituality and writing. Like, the cards help you to better understand your story and to tell your story in a clearer kind of a way. And then writing also helps you to better understand your story and tell your story more clearly. So I was just sensing that there's this connection between the 2. And then, another thing that happened for me recently, because then you came on my show and you were talking about the blog post that you wrote about the 4 clairs. And so then I went to read that blog post, and I was thinking like, okay, for me, the way that I access my intuition is by writing. That's how I know what's true for me, is when I see it on the page. It's sort of like, what would that be? Like clairvoyance, I guess?
It's clairvoyance because you've talked multiple times about imagery, and I can see it within you is imagery. It is clairvoyant, but writing, and when we write and we channel, I also think it's clairaudience, because what happens is it's not like you're hearing a voice in your head, but you're free flow writing, and what comes out on the page, it's like it's audible, but it's written words. So it's a form of clairaudience, of being able to put words to the language that's going on in the liminal brain and the subconscious and the intuitive self. So it's giving word form. It's breathing that into life. So I think it's this combination of clairvoyance and clairaudience.
And the other thing that happens for me too is when someone else writes their story, like when I'm coaching someone, for example, I would never in a million years use the word psychic to describe myself, but I do have a bit of like I feel like I know things about them that I should know. It's not like I'm walking through the grocery store and I'm like, ooh, I know something about this guy who's shopping for apples. It's more like when I'm sitting down and someone's telling me their story, they'll tell me an aspect of their story and I can see more than what they're sharing with me.
Which, guess what that is? Clairvoyance and clairaudience. Because they are talking to you and you are starting to see things and interpret things, which are very much like oracle cards. And that's what I shared with you with oracle cards. They're open to interpretation. They're usually beautifully illustrated. And there's a guidebook that has messaging and prompts in there to detail or outline the meaning behind the oracle card you pull, depending on the deck. And there's this element of seeing the unseen, reading into, intuiting, calling forth meaning and messaging through symbols, through colors, whatever it may be. So again, there's overlap in that, truly. And you and I talked about this on your podcast, but oracle cards for me have been oftentimes the journal prompts I didn't know I needed. You know, when I do my new and full moon, and whether I pull a big 7-card spread of something or I pull 1 or 2 or 3 cards, even one card from 3 different decks, depending on whatever I'm in the mood for, I use that and it starts to take me into my writing process. And I just trust that I'm going to pull what I need to pull in order to get out on paper or out of my heart, out of my body, out of my higher consciousness, pull down that wisdom and get it out so I can see it, understand it, know it, and know, you know, there's the magic, or, oh, shoot, Amanda, you got to work on that, girl. You know?
Totally. Yeah. I've been really loving the practice with the oracle cards because it does give you something tangible to work with. It's like, it gives you the images and then I can piece it together in some sort of a story arc. So it feels like it fits really nicely with the way my brain already works and the way that I already operate spiritually. And I really feel like this is, I guess, sort of in response to the question that you asked, but also like taking us all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. I feel like I'm shifting into this new space where like I'm really being asked to take ownership. I was telling my husband how like being a publishing coach is like no brainer. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got the credentials for that, no problem. But then when he starts to suggest that like I'm helping people really understand their life story, I'm like, well, I have no degree. You know what I mean? So I have like a lot more imposter syndrome when it comes to that. But I feel like I'm like really shifting into taking ownership of how spiritual writing truly is, that you almost can't separate the two. Like I could work with someone in a publishing context who had no interest in spirituality, and I still would be seeing things about them that they don't know that I may not be saying it in that context because it's not as appropriate, but I'm still like, oh, I have insight into your life that you don't, you know, that I shouldn't have, that it's not something you told me, but I can kind of see it because we're working together in this like really personal spiritual capacity.
Well, and that used to happen to me, gosh, I mean, forever in business. It would happen to me in my 20s and early 30s and before I really embraced my psychic and intuitive gifts. I would be in a business meeting and the way that my gift comes through, and I would never have known that this was what was going on until, you know, finally I began to put the puzzle pieces together. But I could be in a business meeting and I could hear the voices in everyone's heads. I mean, that's a lot of chatter, right? And a lot of stuff going on, but I would be leading a meeting and I would intuitively know what to bring up, what to ask, alongside of whatever my agenda was or whatever I was overseeing. I would be doing my thing and then I would hear all these words and things. And, well, what are we going to do about this? How is this going to happen? Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I'm not interested. I can't believe she's talking about this. It would be a whole audience of people talking, and intuitively, because it is my gift, and it's the essentially the claircognizance, but also I'm very telepathic, and gosh, thank goodness for energetic boundaries today, because I can shut that off, you know, but not always, but most of the time. And I'm not nosy. I'm like, I have enough going on in this brain. I don't need to know. But I didn't know all of that and understand it, and I wasn't being nosy. It just was happening. But what was so interesting about it is I knew how to assimilate what was coming through, and I had the gift of orating and leadership in business to pull the right people in the right places, and I intuitively knew about them who would work, and then I could hear their interest in things going, but I thought that was just normal. I didn't know to say, oh, does everybody hear everybody's voices? Because it wasn't like their personal voices were coming through. It was like words and symbols and information. So it was very confusing. But like what you shared, and I hope this helps people out there with your intuition in whatever job or profession you're in, or as a mother, a father, a brother, it doesn't matter what role, how you can be talking to someone, working with someone, a group of people, and information and things and insights are coming to you. And you get to use whatever your role is. So if it's in a professional role, you get to use your expertise or your guidance or, whatever you get to facilitate. You can share your intuition without feeling like you're crossing a boundary or a line. And, that is part of my story. At the end of my healthcare degree, it got to the point where, dead people were showing up in hospitals all the time. And it was such a hot mess and overwhelming. And I was so conflicted and confused because I didn't want to overstep ethically or professionally, but messages were coming through in a way that if I didn't deliver them, I would be denying a part of their story and mine and so many things. But still, for everyone else out there, we all have the gift of intuition.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on today. Tell everyone where they can find you and give a little plug for your book that's coming out, please. And your launch party, which Allie is having her book launch party on May 7th in Nashville. And my live event is in Austin, Texas on May 7th. So magical day for both of us. But it's like, I would have easily gone to Nashville. That'd have been a great time and reason. And Allie's like, I had to come to Austin. So
I know.
Good
I know.
things.
Well, we'll just be celebrating each other from afar. But yeah, the best place to find me is Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. I'm at Allie Fallon on Instagram. ALLYFALLON. And then, I would love to have you pre-order a copy of the book. It's called Write Your Story by Allison Fallon. You can buy that wherever you buy your books. And then after you pre-order, if you order before May 7th, make sure you go to writeyourstory.com/book and enter your order number there, and you'll get access to over $1,800 worth of pre-order bonuses. I put together like an insane pre-order bonus package because I really wanted to incentivize people to go order the book before May 7th. They're all digital resources, but there's a Write Your Story journal. There's a video series that you can watch that's 5 questions to ask before you write your story. You get to also download the first 3 chapters of the book and read them before the book is even out. So all kinds of stuff. There's like 5 or 6 different things that you'll get when you enter your order number there. So make sure you do that as well.
Well, y'all, this is a great time to do that and utilize Allie as a resource, the resource she is, and definitely checking out Write Your Story, her book, but also her podcast. It's wonderful. I hope you all have enjoyed our conversation today. And I know for me, Allie articulates things. This is what she does. She helps people write their story, but she articulates things in ways that to me empower and incentivize. And when I'm incentivized or motivated by someone through their process, their toolkit, and their wisdom, that's when I'm firing and wiring. We get to do these things together and share our gifts. So thank you for coming on today. I feel really illuminated and motivated about some of my writing and some things that I am working on, but some stuff I need to do. I'm like, okay, I'm going to close by saying I love the write for 20 minutes at a time, 4 days in a row. And that in and of itself gives you about a 6-month period where you will see the benefits. I mean, I don't need to overachieve, but I'm like, oh, I can do that. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can definitely connect with Allie Fallon and get her book. Everyone, take care and be well.
Hi, I'm Martha Stewart, and we're back with a new season of my podcast. This season will be even more revealing and more personal, with more entrepreneurs, more live events, and more questions from you. I'm talking to my cosmetic dermatologist, Dr. Dan Belkin, about the secrets behind my skincare. Encore Jane about creating a $1 billion startup. Walter Isaacson about the geniuses who changed the world. Listen and subscribe to the Martha Stewart podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Truck stop brothels run by a web of ex-cons. A Commonwealth attorney wasted on whiskey and power. Protection exchanged for cash and flesh. This is Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South. And I am your host and lifelong wayward woman, Dr. Lindsay Byron. Listen to Hookergate, Criminals and Libertines in the South on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Across Generations, where the voices of Black women unite. I'm your host, Tiffany Cross. Join me and be a part of sisterhood, friendship, wisdom, and laughter. We gather a seasoned elder, myself as the middle generation, and a vibrant young soul for engaging intergenerational conversations. Prepare to engage or hear perspectives that literally no one else has had. Listen to Across Generations podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.